Grace-based parenting is treating your kids the way God treats you. That's all it is. And what's interesting is God does not control us. He works to keep us under control. There's a big difference. When I'm keeping my children under control, I'm setting clear moral boundaries and clear boundaries of decency. And so as a group, everybody's kind of has the best chance of having a joyful life and a productive life. But when I'm controlling somebody, here's how I define high control. I wrote a book on this called The High Cost of High Control. And I define control as when I leverage the strength of my personality or my position against your weaknesses in order to get you to meet my selfish agenda. That's a high controller. That is always toxic. Nobody wants to be on the receiving end of that. And God never does that. He never leverages the strength of his personality or his position against our weaknesses in order to force us to do something that meets his selfish agenda. And by the way, what's interesting, he's God. He has the right to do it. He could do that. He doesn't, because he's dealing with us in grace. And so we're to keep our children under control but not control them. And one of the ways that this really helps us is we take God's grace, and as we quantify it, we find that God's grace, one of the things he does for us, he gives us the freedom to be different. Let me give you some synonyms for different so you know what I mean. Like weird, bizarre, strange, goofy, quirky. God allows us to be, in fact, he enjoys that. He made us unique, weird, strange, goofy, and quirky. He made us that way. And he gets a kick out of it. But parents that are into fear-based parenting or sin management, behavioral modification, performance-based parenting, they have no room for a weird, bizarre, strange, goofy, quirky kid. So you can see that if we start at the wrong spot in our whole thing of either starting at fear or starting at spiritual performance, we've already locked giving kids the freedom to be different out of the thing. One of the very things that God made our heart to thrive on is being able to be different. And so next thing you know, we're imposing all kinds of conditions and expectations on our kids that have nothing to do with God's heart, but that doesn't stop us from saying it does. Like a daughter gets ready to go out, and you say, I don't think Jesus would be very pleased with your outfit. Or I don't think Jesus would be very pleased with your hair, to your son who's got, doing something wild with his hair. And we're supposed to be people of the Word of God. Where does it say that in the Word of God? First of all, the Bible, what does it say about clothing? It says, be modest, right? It gives us but here's what's interesting. Does the Bible ever define modesty? No. I'll tell you somebody who does define modesty. The Taliban. They define it. And women go around, wearing these gigantic, that's what happens when we go legalistic. And say, no. It gives us guidelines. Now, have we had to say to our daughter sometime, I'm sorry, but honey, you can't wear that, and here's why. And so forth. And do they always like that? No. But we try and do it with the basic, obvious, and we don't make it a biblical issue or spiritual issue. We just make it a practical issue. We got to give them the freedom to be different. When kids have the freedom to be different, weird, bizarre, strange, goofy, quirky, it's amazing how many times those things about them are things that God put in them to help really kind of make them the bigger person he meant them to be. Now, does that mean, for instance, that they always do this in balance? And the answer, of course, is no. Some kids don't know balance when they're born. That's one of the character traits we have to build into them. For instance, you might have a kid that's really loud and loves to play loud. Well, I think that's great if they're outside or they're in the house and nobody else is around or whatever. If we're having dinner or we have company, no, you want to help bring that down. So that being different doesn't mean that there aren't reasonable, obvious guidelines to that. And like we let our boys did all kinds of weird things with their hair in their teenage years, and they would dress all kinds of different ways. We didn't care about that, but we could make it audible. We call an audible. Hey, we're going to church. We're going to dress this way, or we're going to a wedding. You got to dress this way. We're going to This, you got to dress this way, just because that's what this occasion requires. But we didn't go and impose that on them. We had one daughter, she was really avant-garde. Most of the kids, when they would get up to get ready for school, they'd walk into their closet, pick out an outfit. Well, she'd start in her closet. And then she'd go to her brothers and their sisters and her brothers and her mothers and her dads, and she'd come up with this kind of weird-looking thing. We just thought, that's fine, that's her. And she's grown up to be a very stylish, elegant woman. But if we'd have limited that and fought her on that, I think we could have stifled something great that God was building into her. Grace-based families give their kids freedom to be different.